Right now, Pittsburgh's best sports show is about to begin. Call us or tweet us. We got things to talk about on the Ireland Contracting Nightly Sports Call.
Thank you very much, Ken. Welcome, everybody, to the Ireland Contracting Nightly Sports Call. I'm your host, Josh Taylor, in tonight for Bob Pompiani. Joining me in studio from 93.7 The Fan, also a columnist for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Ron Cook, joins me. And Ron, we will start with, I guess it's the news of the day, since it actually originated this morning, but former Steelers linebacker James Harrison on the TV show Undisputed, FS1 National Morning Show, was asked about the differences in coaching styles between Mike Tomlin and Bill Belichick, and he gave an answer that I think a lot of people that have been around football will probably tell you that I don't think it's a surprising opinion that he considers Belichick a better coach. However, the reason why he considers Belichick a better coach, he says that Belichick is more disciplined. He did credit Mike Tomlin as a player's coach. He credits him as a good coach, but thinks Mike Tomlin needs to be more disciplined in how he deals with players, and even talked about how, you know, maybe he doesn't treat everybody equally. Maybe there's some playing of favorites there, maybe some favoritism among some players as opposed to others, where he believes that Bill Belichick pretty much treats everybody the same way. Wanted to get your thoughts on what he said and how much merit is there to that, how much of it is truthful, how much of it maybe is twisted in his.
I think there's absolutely truth to it. I love the message. I just don't have a lot of respect for the messenger. Part of Mike Tomlin's discipline, lack of discipline involved James Harrison. If the stories were true that he fell asleep at meetings, didn't stay around for the game, Tomlin kept him around all season. So I find that kind of funny. That Harrison would be the guy saying he needs to get tougher. Well, he should have been tougher with James Harrison. But there's no question Tomlin let too much go, the social media stuff. I don't know if you can put the toothpaste back into the container. He needs to be a little bit more of a disciplinarian. I've always said, it's tough for these coaches. I remember when Plexico Burress was here, he left to go to New York with Tom Coughlin, and everybody goes, how's he going to deal with it? Because I remember Jerome was the guy who said he'd show up late for meetings, he'd show up late for planes, and Cowher let him get away with it. So it's not just the Tomlin issue, but there's no doubt I think Harrison's message is right. I just question him being the guy to deliver it.
And it's interesting because I believe the day that he signed with New England, you and I were here in this studio talking about it on this show, and it was one of the things that was discussed. And one of the things we talked about was what his role would be in New England. And another thing he mentioned in that interview, he talked about how the New England coaches seem to prepare more or prepare better than maybe the Steelers coaches do. Because he talked about them having so many meetings, and he'd never been so many meetings in his life. And that was one of the reasons why he was able to catch on and learn New England's defense.
Well, we'll find out if it's going to be as good. The defensive coordinator left to go to Detroit, Matt Patricia. So we'll see if the next guy steps in and can do it. Belichick obviously deserves a lot of credit. Hey, listen, I'm a Mike Tomlin fan. I think you could argue he's the second best coach, maybe the third best coach in the league, but he's not on Belichick's level. And I think there's a big gap between the two, but I think there's a big gap between everybody and Belichick. We'll see now that the coordinator's moved on. He's replaced those guys before and kept winning. Now, how much credit do you give Tom Brady and those guys? We'll find out. But I'm not going to sit here and say I think Mike Tomlin's as good as Belichick, because I don't.
I would have to agree with that. And that's nothing against Mike Tomlin. I think Bill Belichick's resume speaks for itself. I think that's pretty fair to discern. Another thing I'll ask you about, Ron, also Steelers related, another thing they discussed was Le'Veon Bell and his situation, and James Harrison said he understood it from both sides. He understood how Le'Veon Bell wants to be paid as a different kind of player because he does a lot of things that some running backs and even some receivers don't do. However, he also understands that the Steelers have other guys that they've tried to pay in the past and try to at least, reward other people equally. So he does mention that there is a difficult situation there, so maybe the Steelers just don't have the money. However, by the time that discussion was over, everybody had agreed that somehow you find a way to do it. Was there really a way to find a way?
I don't think so. I don't blame either side here. It was just a tough situation. The Steelers are bidding against themselves for Le'Veon because he's not a free agent. They're trying to determine the market. I think they went way up to try to keep him, and it was his right to say no to that. He doesn't have a contract. It's not like he's holding out at all. I mean, he's playing the system the way the system is set up. He's gambling that he's going to stay healthy and have a productive year. I think the Steelers went way out of their way to try to keep him. Didn't work. I'm okay with that. I'm going to enjoy watching Le'Veon one more year, and then say goodbye to him and wish him well after the year. Hopefully he can help him win a Super Bowl before then.
Well, we will talk more about this, and we'll talk about the Pirates as well, because we haven't even gotten into that yet. But we'll talk about Austin Meadows and some of the comments he had both at the end of the first half and earlier today on 93.7 The Fan. We'll discuss that as well. We're taking your phone calls, 412-575-2600 on the Borders and Borders hotline. Stick around.